Good day to you. Welcome to this week's edition of 26 Minutes With. It's the podcast that really is about leadership and really featuring people who are making a difference, making an impact, and leading in some area of life, whether it's in business or the environment or health and wellness. This is the podcast you want to tap into each week. And this week we have a wonderful guest. Pastor Donna Hubbard is a survivor of human trafficking. And in 1994, she founded Women at the Well Transition Center. It's a registered nonprofit ministry providing training, counseling, and direct services to formerly incarcerated women and women rescued from human trafficking throughout the world. And today at Women at the Well, it offers programs that include parenting from prison, street intervention with trafficked girls and women, relapse prevention, reentry case management, and employment readiness. Donna co-authored the Leadership Development Training Institute for formerly incarcerated persons in 2002. She works with Airline Ambassadors International as a certified human trafficking awareness trainer and facilitated trainings in Hungary, Latvia, Kenya, Thailand, the Philippines, Colombia, Iceland, Qatar, and the United Emirates, Arab Emirates, and Korea. She's employed as a flight attendant for a major commercial airline and keeps an eye on possible victims of sex trafficking, right? And Donna is also currently concentrating on earning her doctorate in Women's International Studies. And in January 2023, she received the Sword and Shield Award by the nonprofit organization, the Attorneys General Alliance, and Bishop Donna Hubbard became the first woman bishop of 113 churches worldwide. Donna, welcome. What a joy to have you today. What an honor.
Thank you so much, David. I appreciate the invitation. I'm looking forward to the interview.
Yeah. This work, I saw the movie Sound of Freedom and, I'm familiar with what's going on in the world. To me, this work is so heavy, yet it's hopeful all at once. Like your work is heavy, but hopeful. And in your journey, you had experienced sex trafficking and abuse. How did that happen? And especially in a country where, the US, where we consider that country to be one of the freest in the world.
Well, I'd have to say it was a journey. So the way that trafficking has evolved now is very different. When I first started as a flight attendant in 1978, nobody was talking about human trafficking. You were either a prostitute or you were just a loose woman, and there was nothing in the middle, and people didn't see it as anything in the middle. So it took a lot for me to be able to talk about what happened to me, because I really didn't know how to verbalize it.
Right.
But it was so much more than prostitution. Um, I I was a young woman looking for love in all the wrong places. I ended up with a man I thought loved me, cared about me, had a great job. I had a great job, young children. And he told me all the things I guess I needed to hear or wanted to hear, until one day I woke up and I was being raped. I was being assaulted. He had taken me to a party and I had had champagne, and I thought that, this was living on high on the hog. But in reality, um, I woke up and there was another man on top of me, and it wasn't him. And so I woke up when I passed out after a while. I don't know how many men there were. They were all standing along the wall. They were laughing. They were watching what was happening. It was almost an out of body experience. I realized I had been drugged.
Mm.
And when I woke up, I was literally alone in the room and alone in the penthouse. I got up, put on my clothes, and left. And I couldn't even talk about what happened to me, but I couldn't get rid of the memory either. And so I couldn't get rid of what happened to me, and I couldn't get rid of the memories, and they followed me. But I really tried to anesthetize what happened. I really tried to just medicate it, and I couldn't. And so I took my children and I ran to the other side of the country. I ran to California. I left my job and everything, trying to get away from my memories. And I realized everywhere I went, there I was. And so um, I still couldn't verbalize what happened to me that night. I couldn't even say it and own it, if you understand what I'm saying. I couldn't own what had happened to me. And so um, I just kept running from myself. And when I went to California, I ended up in one of the worst neighborhoods there in California. And I moved down in an apartment complex that was down the hall from a guy and his wife and her sister. And they helped me with my kids. They helped me find food. They watched the children while I went to look for a job. And 2 months after I got there, he told me he was a pimp and I owed him. And if I wouldn't do what I was told, he'd take one of my daughters and they would.
Oh,
So I
gee.
did whatever I had to do to stay alive.
Yeah, no kidding.
And that went on until I became pregnant and I ended up in the hospital. My other children I had sent them to be home to be with my mother. And I ended up pregnant and in the hospital. And that is how I got away from him. At that point, I went to Minnesota where I thought it would be safe. That's where my mother was. And I started working I went registered for school and started working at a television station as an investigative reporter
Wow.
and started working on a story I did a lot of investigative work and they had a story on gang infiltration and crack cocaine in the Minnesota area. And so I started doing the undercover work and no sooner, I mean, it wasn't even 3 months later that they saw me. And this was somebody that remembered me from California, passed the word, and you'd be surprised how quickly they descended upon me. And at that point, I knew I had two choices to do what I was told or they were going to kill me. And I knew that they were going to kill me. I made too much money. I knew too much and so I did what I had to stay alive. And of course, my mother did not know what was going on. My children did not know what was going on. They thought these were great guys because they took them every time they sent me out. They took them shopping, you know. So they thought that was something great. And the reality is that if I didn't bring home money, if I didn't do what I was told, I would have lost my life. And
How,
I don't know what would have happened to my children.
yeah. How old would you have been?
I was in my early 30s.
Okay.
I was in my late 20s when I went to California. So this was over a period of time from my late 20s, my mid to late 20s into my early 30s.
And how did you find it in your heart to overcome these atrocities and have some semblance of dignity and self-esteem?
It's interesting you asked me that question, David. I've been interviewed a lot, but no one has really ever asked me that question. And I'm excited about answering it. I have to tell you, I'm happy to answer that question. So while I was in prison, see, I was in prison before I was incarcerated because I was in prison mentally and spiritually. I felt after a while, I felt like I deserved what I got. And I learned that we do really do attract what we think we deserve as people. We attract what we think we deserve. And so I thought that I deserved to be abused. I thought that I deserved to be assaulted and exploited. Because of what had happened to me, I didn't feel that I was worth any more than that. And so I I didn't know how to get out of that cycle. And so while I was in prison, I learned what it meant to be free. I learned how to be free in prison, if you could understand that. I learned how to be free in prison. I learned how to be able to look at myself in the mirror and be okay with who I am. I had to learn how to forgive myself. And so while I was there, I said, if I have to, when I went to prison, it was because, um, when I went to prison, it was really because I was arrested with these gentlemen. And I knew that if they bailed me out, they were either going to kill me or things would have been worse. So I didn't let them bail me out. And I was sentenced to two 12-year sentences in federal maximum security prison. And I did not open my mouth because I knew that, I had gotten my children to my mother, and they didn't know where my mother was when I moved my children over there. But while I was in prison, while I was in jail waiting to go to prison, I called home and I spoke to my mother. She said, "Your friends brought me a microwave." I said, "What friends are you talking about, Mom?" She said, "The guys that were always at your house. They brought me a microwave." That was their way of letting me know that they knew where my mother was and for me to keep my mouth shut. And I did. And I mean, what else would I do? So, um, while I was in prison, I said, if I have to give up this much of my life, this much time, I'm going to get something back for it. And I literally just began to read the Bible and to study and to pray. I literally began to spend my time in the law library to learn everything I could about cases like mine. What happens? I had no idea what was going to happen to me. I'm looking at two 12-year sentences. I didn't know what was going to happen to me or what the result would have been was going to be after I got out. I had no idea. I felt like I had lost everything, you
Yeah.
know, but I had saved my life and I had saved my children's lives. And as long as I kept my mouth shut, I thought my children would be okay. But when when my mother told me that she had gotten the
Microwave.
uh, microwave, I knew then that they knew where she was and they knew where the children were. So I still had to tread lightly, if you can understand what I'm saying. And so one of my counselors finally said to me, "You're not like any of these other women, Donna. You don't brag about your case. You don't talk about it. You are always in the library." If I wasn't in the law library, I was in the chapel. And if I wasn't in the chapel, I was in the weight room lifting weights. And I realized that one of the things I had neglected as an addict, because the only way to anesthetize myself and deal with what I was living in,
Yes.
that the hell that I was living in, was to anesthetize myself. And so I had $1,000 a day crack cocaine habit. And and that's how they controlled me. They made sure that they could control me that way. So I I had lost everything, but I was determined to get my life back, my mind back, and my body back. And so if I wasn't in the chapel and I wasn't in the law library, I was going to be in the weight room lifting weights. And so I just broke down when my counselor asked me, what happened? And I told her I broke down and cried. Well, that led to the actual arrest and prosecution of these young men for trafficking me. Nobody was talking about trafficking, but that's
Mm.
basically what they were arrested for. And it literally gave them the evidence that they needed also to see that there were several other young women that they had been exploiting. I didn't know anything about, but they were telling these young women about me and how they had controlled this woman for all these years and how she did what she was told to. Um, and they had told these young women that they had killed me. But of course, when it surfaced, the young girls realized that that was how they had manipulated them. It was just another form of leverage. And so human trafficking is force, fraud, and coercion. So it was another form of coercion that they used on these women to threaten them to do to them what they had done to me, when in actuality, I was sitting in prison. And God had saved my life. But while I was in prison, David, something really important happened. I learned three things: accountability, commitment, and consistency. And those three things helped me change my life, because accountability is really about making no more excuses and telling no more lies. And I realized that if I could learn to be accountable for my own actions and accountable to myself and for myself, I could regain my self esteem. And self esteem is really how you feel about yourself.
Yeah.
And so I developed, I learned to develop accountability. And then the second thing was commitment. And I realized if I couldn't make a commitment to the girl I looked at in the mirror every day, then I couldn't make a commitment to a God I couldn't see, or my children who were at home, if I couldn't make a commitment to myself. And I think that's the first thing that helped me to understand how important self-care, how important recovery and rehabilitation and restoration is that I had to be accountable for my actions. I had to be accountable to myself, because I can remember when I wasn't accountable to anybody but the dope dealer. And and then I had to be committed to myself. I had to be committed to having a better life. I had to be committed to being a better person, a better mother. And so I realized that when I made that commitment, I could regain myself my self-respect. It was really about how I treated myself. So I learned to be accountable to regain my self-esteem. I learned commitment to regain my self-respect, which is how I treat myself. And then finally, I learned about consistency because I learned that it's not what you do one time that changes the quality of your life, but it's what you do consistently that will change the quality of your life. And so I learned that I had done the wrong thing consistently, and this is where I ended up. And when that light bulb went off in my head, David, I said, well, what would happen if I learned to do the right thing consistently? And that light bulb went off, and I started doing everything that I could to regain my life. I started writing letters of apology. I started taking classes. I started doing everything I needed to do. And I truly made a commitment to God. I said, Lord, if you will use this time to make me a better person, then I will live my life for you when I get home and while I'm here for the rest of my life. And that's what I did. And so that consistency helped me to regain my self-confidence because I understood that if I pay my bills consistently, I can have the confidence to get to have access to loans and credit cards and all of that. So I learned that if I could be consistent with doing the right thing, that I could regain my self-confidence. And that's what happened. I regained my self-esteem, my self-respect, and my self-confidence through accountability, commitment, and consistency.
I love that. And I have a couple of questions that came out of what you just said. You said
Sure.
you had two 12-year sentences. What did you
Mhm.
actually have to serve? And actually, too, going to prison is it's a horrible thing to have to do and go through, but it actually saved your life.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
did you
So,
have to do both
um,
sentences?
well, fortunately, I was given a parolable sentence literally 9 days before mandatory minimums became constitutional in the
Mm.
United States. Mandatory minimums mean that you serve about 70% of your sentence. Prior to that, you could serve about 40% of your sentence and you could be eligible for parole. You could serve 30% and be eligible for parole. And so I was sentenced just 9 days before mandatory minimums became constitutional. And so I have to give my uncle Benjamin Malcolm credit for that. He was the first African American appointed to the Federal Parole Commission by President Jimmy Carter. And
Mm.
so he literally stepped down from his position as a federal parole commissioner to represent me before the parole board. And so I went into prison in to actual prison in 1987. Yes. And I came home in 92, but I had two 12-year sentences. So I was paroled. And literally, up until that point, I had served in and out of jail, in and out of jail, in and out of jail, state prison and jail through California. And wherever they had me, I would end up in jail and I'd be in there for 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, and these guys would bail me out and put me back to work. And so literally I did about 10 years in and out of prison. On that sentence, like I said, I went in 87 and came out in 92. And I had 17 years of parole. So but when I got out, I hit the ground running, David. I started Woman at the Well Transition Center as a group of us just getting together and sharing who was going to hire ex-offenders, who was going to help us get clothes, where could we live, can we get help getting our kids back, where can we get addiction services, and so I went to a woman named Sandra Barnhill who had an organization called Aid to Imprisoned Mothers. When I was given parole, nobody thought I was going to get out. No one thought, not with a sentence like mine, you know what I mean? And I was convicted with these very violent gang members. And yet, when God has favor on your life, nobody else can question it. And I learned that when God has his hand on your life, you can't explain it, but others can't deny it. And so God had given me great favor just to be sentenced before those mandatory minimums became constitutional. And so when I got out, I literally hit the ground running because I had made a commitment to God that I was going to live for him because he gave me another life. He gave me a second chance. And so I went to Aid to Imprisoned Mothers, which I had heard about while I was in prison. I sat down in her office, literally in Atlanta, Georgia. The only person that was here that was I was allowed to parole to was my real father, and I didn't even know him. He had just gotten out of prison, and so I didn't even know my real father. He had just gotten out of prison, but instead of the people that had actually stepped forward and say, "Hey, I'll take Donna Hubbard," and they were unbelievable people, upstanding people, just awesome. One was a R&B celebrity, Betty Wright, who did No Pain, No Gain, and the Cleanup Woman,
Yeah.
and she had come to know me in prison, and she is like my sister, and she passed away 3 years ago, and so, but she stepped up and told the parole board, "I'll take Donna." And they wouldn't let me go to Betty. They wouldn't let me go to Pastor Betty Wright. I mean, to Pastor Betty Wright or Pastor Betty Oates. And they let me go to my father with no background check or anything. And I didn't know my father. But I came to Atlanta and I sat down in Sandra's office. And for an hour, I cried. That's all I could do was cry. And so she let me have office space. She put me to work working with other women who had just gotten out. And it was part of my healing process as well. I got a job at the Marriott Marquis, who hired me in spite of, shout out to the Marriott Corporation. They hired me in spite of my record. And so, and I worked there for more than 6 years. But I started literally reaching back to women like myself because I realized I wasn't the only one. And I realized that no one else was going to help us if we didn't help ourselves. And so we started Woman at the Well with these little group meetings once a week. And we went from having 5 women to 7 to 9 to 11 to 18. And I would invite speakers from Morehouse, from Spelman. I would invite entrepreneurs. I would invite pastors. I would invite women business owners. Anyone that I felt could bring something to the table to help encourage us as broken women, as women who had to fight our way back to society with this stigma on us that said we were formerly incarcerated. And at that time, I wasn't even talking about having been trafficked because I didn't know how to talk about it. And there was such a shame and a stigma that went along with it that I couldn't talk about it. And one day I just blurted it out and I said, I'm a survivor of human trafficking. And everybody looked at me and said, "Really?" And they said, "You never talked about it." I said, "I didn't know how. I didn't know how to talk about what had happened to me." It wasn't simple prostitution because the things that happened to me were definitely part of an organized crime syndicate. It was definitely organized criminal behavior. And so I, um, I started talking about it. And the more I talked about it, the more I realized that I wasn't alone, that there was a definite overlap between women who were incarcerated and women who had been exploited.
Yes.
And so I began to bring those two together and understood. It also helped me understand the mentality that we had, that we think that we attract what we think we deserve. And we had to get out of the mentality of exploitation as well. And so, Woman at the Well Transition Center, when I began to see some of the women going back to jail, and I realized that we needed more than simple discussion groups once a week, that we needed so much more support from the communities that we lived in, from the resources in our community, and we needed to have a voice to be able to say what we need because people spend a lot of time telling us what we need and never ask us what we need.
So
And so
what did you need? Like what did we like to me it's like it's so deep and the pain and the sadness and the low self-esteem that we talked about is so deep. How do you serve those needs to help the women that you work with and yourself to come
well,
to come back? Because like can you come back from it? Like that's
of course, look at me.
yeah,
I um there is a way back. And again, we can't do it by ourselves.
no,
You could ask us what we need and we can tell you what we need, but we still can't do it by ourselves. We
right.
need communities to embrace us. In fact, because when I first opened my first transition center, so many of the women said, I feel like because I live in this house and they know who we are, that I have this sign on my forehead. I said, yeah, but you got to use that sign as a beacon that that's what we did and that's not who we are.
Hmm.
That's what happened to us. That's not who we are. It doesn't define us. And so when I opened my first transition center here in Atlanta, I realized that I had to prove that the community would be safe, but I also had to ensure the safety of the women who came to us. And so I had this wonderful proposal. I had this wonderful idea in my mind. I had no idea how I was going to make it happen and who was going to believe me anyway. But I really did. I started telling my testimony at churches. People started hearing me. And I wrote a letter to George Soros of the Open Society. That's what it was called at the time. And I wrote a letter to a philanthropist called George Soros. And I thought I wrote this wonderful grant. My mother was a grant writer, and I thought I wrote this grant. And he wrote me back and said, "This is nice, Donna, but could you just tell us, how did you turn your life around?" I said, "Nice. I worked hard on this grant." But he was really just interested in the process. What did you do to change your life? How did you do this? How did you come back? And I sat down and I told him about the concept of accountability, commitment, and consistency. I told him about the fact that I had a strong faith and a strong spiritual foundation. And I told him the statistics that people who develop a strong spiritual foundation, whether it's Judaism, whatever it is, Islamic or Christian, if they have a connection with their spiritual foundation, that the likelihood of their recidivism was only about 3%.
Wow.
And I told him all the statistics, and he sent me a check for $15,000 to start my first transition center. And so I said, if he could believe in me, maybe there's some other people that could believe in me. And I began to talk about what I wanted to do in our community, in our city, in our state, in our country. And people began to listen. And not only did people who could help begin to listen, but women like myself began to listen and say, you know what, if God could do it for her, he could do it for me. And so they would come to me and say, this is what I need. So I learned that it's not just about what I can do, but it's about what people would be willing to listen to, if people would be willing to believe, and they had to see it. There's a scripture in the Bible that talks about a time when the people of Israel were in the desert,
Hmm.
and they were bitten by this serpent, and the serpent bit them. And when Moses went and said, God, look, all the people are sick because they were bitten by this serpent. And he said, take that serpent and put it up on a stick and show it to the people. And when they look upon that serpent that bit them, they will be healed. And I realized that they had to see me to believe that it could happen for their daughter, their sister, their mother, their aunt, that if people could see that we really can come back, we really can recover, we really can be restored, we really can have productive lives, that if people could see that, they could believe it for themselves and for the people that their family members, for their community, for other people that they knew, their loved ones, their wives. And so the more I talked about it, the more people listened, the more people believed. And I think I'm a testimony that if people can believe it, then they can receive it, and they can believe it for themselves,
Yes.
and for others. And I think that it does matter, because we get so many bad reports about what happens when people get out, uh, and we get so many bad reports about mothers who go to prison. Now, that's a bad mother. I made some terrible decisions and some bad mistakes as a mother, but nobody comes into the world, well, you don't get this book that tells you how to be a mother or how to make all the right decisions. And so I did what I had to do to survive, and to keep my children alive. And unfortunately, by God's grace, I have wonderful children who have heard my story now. They didn't know then what was going on, but they know now. And so they have a better understanding of how it can happen to somebody even like me. And it truly can happen, David, to anybody. Trafficking and exploitation doesn't know color, gender, race, religion, or economic status. It could happen to anyone.
Yeah.
It's not all kidnapping. Again, human trafficking is force, fraud, and coercion, and it's happened all over the world. And we know now that there are more than 40 million people being exploited in this world. It is the number one human rights violation in our generation.
Yeah. And
And
as an economy, it's one of the biggest money makers in the
absolutely,
world
we're
right
talking about $150 billion, which
now.
is more than Nike, Google and Starbucks together. You
Yeah.
know, if I told you I wanted you to invest in a business that makes more than $150 billion, everybody would jump on it. But it also includes the other forms of organized crime, money laundering, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking. There's so many other forms of criminal enterprise that are engaged in and have some fingerprint in human trafficking. And most of the time, when you talk to people about gangs, we learn that when we think about gangs, we think about drugs and we think about weapons. But you don't think about where they got the money to purchase the drugs or the weapons. And it really is, it starts with the exploitation of people. Um, these gangs become lucrative. They become, investment worthy. People are actually investing in the money that these gangs make because they take on this very civilized persona. But the reality is, and when we talk about uh, things like child soldiers and child brides, we think that happens somewhere else. But the reality is, when a drug dealer gives a young person a weapon and a drug package and says, bring me my money back, and here's a weapon to protect yourself, and make sure you let me know about the police, that's a child soldier. Right in our own community, that drug dealer has now recruited a soldier. And when we talk about child brides, we think about the fact that we know stories that have made public, have gotten public attention, where young girls have been basically traded, we'll say traded, for monetary gain.
Yes.
Their parents can sign a paper and let them get married as early as 13 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. It's happening in countries like India, and
Yeah, it's
and
happening
often,
everywhere.
yeah, it actually, that money for, selling their daughter off to a husband helps
Yep.
the family live.
Yep.
We're with Pastor Donna Hubbard. This is 26 Minutes with. Donna is a survivor, as you've been listening to, of human trafficking. In 1994, she founded Women at the Well Transition Center, a registered nonprofit ministry providing training, counseling, and direct services to formerly incarcerated women and women rescued from human trafficking throughout the world. Donna, this summer, as we talked a bit off air, this summer we got exposed to how deep and how pervasive and how much money goes into the world of child sex trafficking. And it was the movie The Sound of Freedom, and it did really well at the box office.
Definitely.
Many that did not want to see the film, they would not. And the media pundits actually denounced the film. Here in Canada, there was a CBC reporter who kind of laughed at it and said, well, it's part of the Trump conspiracy theory people,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And he suggested it was a tad on the conspiracy side. And truthfully, that really got me, because I have a background in
Yeah.
it as well. So what do you say to those who turned a blind eye, and to the media that come close to ridiculing the film and the message within it? Because I thought the film was really well done, in terms of, it didn't go too deep, but it went deep enough to show you
Exactly.
what's going on. What would you say
Um,
to people that turned a blind?
so I don't have anything negative to say about the film, because I know how real human trafficking is. I know
Mhm.
how real the impact is on the families, the communities, the economy, on our public policies, on our social media. I know how real trafficking is. Some of the pictures of exploited children and women and boys and girls, it's that's real. So anyone that thinks that it's not real is delusional. And I also believe that some people will deny what they don't want to deal with. You know what I mean? They will deny that it exists if they don't want to deal with it.
Mhm.
So I will say that it was very well done. It was very well written and directed. I think that the next step in looking at human trafficking in terms of how movies are made needs to be understanding how people get how people get recruited, how they get tricked into being exploited, how the grooming process actually works, and it's much more sophisticated. Looking at The Sound of Freedom, we get an understanding of how vulnerable children are,
Mhm.
how quickly it can happen, and that it can happen to anybody. But again, human trafficking is not just kidnapping, it's force, fraud, and coercion. So there's also the fraud of buying into the no experience necessary, all expenses paid, come and take this job. And you get there and they take your ID, they take your freedom, they feed you when they want to, you stay where they tell you to stay, you do what they tell you to do. And you realize after you have taken this job that you thought was supposed to be great and you're supposed to be sending money home to your family, you realize now you're the one that's being exploited. And then there's coercion, which is what happened to me. And in many places, it is common for family members to trade a family member for a debt that the family owes.
Oh
And in
boy.
many cultures, it has gone on for years, for centuries. And I have to to insert into every interview I do that the trafficking of people of color did not just begin with this movement.
Right.
The trafficking of people and trafficking and exploitation of people of color began centuries ago, but it was an acceptable practice for so many. It was never an acceptable practice in humanity, but it was an acceptable practice that people thought was okay because they just, they figured these people were beneath them. And so the exploitation of people of color has gone on for a long time before this became a movement. And so I don't want to minimize um, at all my ancestors went through, but I don't minimize the fact that today trafficking is not relegated by your color, your economic status, your ethnicity, none of that. Trafficking across Eastern Europe happens, and Western Europe, all throughout Australia, all throughout some of the places we never think of it happening. When I was in Latvia, when I was in Romania, the issue of trafficking was very prevalent, which is why I went there to do the training. Um, so many law enforcement officers still think of human trafficking the way people thought about rape. Well, she must have asked for it. She must have been wearing something. She must have been doing something. She must have been with the wrong person.
Well,
And
yeah,
people don't
a
understand.
kid could do that, you know?
Right. And
Yeah.
so and so I make it a point of saying that human trafficking can happen to anybody because you don't know how quickly groomers move in the same way that legislation and law enforcement has been able to adjust. The traffickers have done the same thing. So now they have new forms of recruiting. They will actually send people into jails and prisons to recruit people, and they do it as easily as saying, when you get out, do you have a place to live? Oh, now you can come and live with me and my boyfriend, or you can come and live with me and my dad. And all of a sudden, this young girl who thinks she now has a safe place to live because she met this woman in prison or this girl in prison now finds herself in the same position that I did, owing somebody and being afraid to talk about what happens because the shame and stigma that goes along with it makes you feel vulnerable, makes you feel inadequate.
Yeah. How do we then begin to really eradicate the planet from this? Like
There
divine
have all,
intervention, because like I look at this issue and it's like this is so big
yeah,
and it's so pervasive. It's in politics, the Jeffrey Epstein uh,
yep.
black book and with names, and it's so pervasive. How do we begin to make a dent? And then the next other question is, how has your Wellness Transition Center helped too? What's the impact that you're really proud of? But
So
first, how do we make a dent in this?
I
Other
think the
than
first thing is making sure that people are educated and informed. It's not just enough to be educated, but we also have to be informed. And informed means our parents and our communities need to be educated about what human trafficking is, what it looks like, um, and how to be proactive in addressing it. You can't be too afraid to talk to your daughters and your sons about it. And then when something happens, now the whole world needs to know my child is missing or my child is being exploited and I can't get them out. So we have to be willing to listen, and we have to be willing to talk to our young people, our children. We have to be aware about what's going on around us. We need to be observant, because traffickers count on people being too busy in their own lives to see what they're looking at. And
Yeah.
a lot of people don't report what they see because, number one, they don't want to get involved. And number two, they don't want to be wrong. And I understand that. But we're not here to teach or talk about confronting anybody or the prosecution. That's not in our hands. What is in our hands is being able to recognize it and report it. So the first thing I think has to happen is that people need to be educated about what human trafficking is. And they have to be informed in their own families, in their own communities, on their jobs, in their workplace, environments, in their churches, law enforcement, public health officials. We need to be informed and educated about what human trafficking is and the impact it has in our families and our communities, because it has a residual effect. A woman who is being trafficked, who has children at home like myself, that makes the whole family dynamic changes, the community changes, the economic status changes, and so trafficking has an impact throughout that entire chain of community and family. So
Right.
I think the first thing is to be educated and informed. And I think that we also have to be able to give people the tools that they need that empower them. You can't empower another human being, but you can give them the tools that they need to empower themselves. And so I think that's part of what happens with educating our airline and aviation employees. I'm a flight attendant, and we have airlines now that are very, very dedicated to training especially the flight crew and the front facing work staff on how to recognize something that doesn't look right, something that doesn't sound right, probably isn't right. But what do we do with that information? Who do we tell, and what are we looking for? What do we tell? And so making sure that we have the tools that we need to feel empowered when we make a report. And this is what I see. This is why I know it doesn't look right. This is my coworker who also saw it. This is where it was. This is why we were suspicious. And so those are the things that people need to, in their workplace, need to feel empowered enough to say. And that's at sporting events, in hotels, the Uber drivers, your bus stations, your traffic, your transportation employees,
Yeah.
all across the board. People need to know, and we also have to begin to call out those industries that exploit um, the trauma of trafficking. And I can think of several movies where trafficking these girls and women became an acceptable entertainment. It was an acceptable entertainment. And so we have to be able to call out those industry leaders and say, this is not okay. It is not okay to exploit, to show that that's entertainment. It is not entertainment. It has an impact. It has an impact down the line on the families and the people involved around these women and girls and boys.
I see it as generational trauma. And
Absolutely.
and it shows up just in what's going on in the world today, like in the Middle East,
Absolutely.
or
Absolutely.
the war that's happening, or just in relationships. Like if a woman is really wounded, and obviously so, and still is struggling to come back from this travesty,
Yeah. Yeah.
their relationships with men are going to be affected. The trust with
Absolutely.
men, the communication, and the men are going to go, yeah, but I'm doing my best, like, yeah, this is like,
It is a generational curse.
yeah, it's generational trauma.
And but it is generational trauma that can be addressed.
Right.
It can be addressed, and it can be resolved. Again, as I said, I think that it's important that people are educated and
Yes.
informed. And that's what we have done at Women at the Well Transition Center. First of all, the interviews that I have done throughout these 25 years, it literally puts a face on women like myself. It puts a face on what it is to be formerly incarcerated, to be rescued, to be previously trafficked and traumatized. It puts a face on the women and girls that we're talking about. And that makes a huge difference when people can see that, oh, she looks like everybody else. I had one employer tell me, well, you don't look like a convict. And I said, What does a convict look like? I'm not sure, but there's my record, so you have it in front of you. And so the woman at the Well Transition Center has been able to put a face on what women who have been exploited and women who have been formerly incarcerated, what we look like. We look like your sister, your aunt, your wife, your niece, your granddaughter, your daughter, your mother. Okay. And the other thing is that we have been able to impact policies and legislation and programs so that they have a broader scope of impact. And by that I mean, it's when a woman goes to prison who has children, it's not just a woman that's in prison, the family is in prison, the children. And so we've been able to bring a human side to what happens to children and families when the mother goes to prison, but also when fathers go to prison, and what happens to young girls when they are traumatized, when they're trafficked, what happens to them and how do we help them? And so I think that we have also strengthened the each one reach one concept, that there is no greater impact in a person's life than to reach back and help someone else who may be struggling in the same area that they were struggling in. So I think the greatest satisfaction that I have had, so many times I've gone into prisons and talked to women who are incarcerated who literally feel like they have no hope
Mhm.
of ever seeing their children again, of ever living a normal life, of what will happen to them when they get out. And there are so many times I have gone into the prisons, and I teach inside prisons, um, several different classes, but walking out of the prison one day I realized that I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And there is no greater satisfaction than knowing you are doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing in life. And
And you're not
so,
your past. You're now a vision
right.
of hope. Yet you're using your past to heal others.
I'm not defined by what happened to me.
No,
Those circumstances don't define me.
no.
I am so much more
Mhm.
than what happened to me. I am so much more than a record. I am so much more than a statistic. I am a child of God, and I am a survivor, and I am victorious because I have overcome not what other people did to me, but what I did to myself. And sometimes we have to remember that some things have to be restored, not that people took from me, but the things that I gave away as well. And I always talk about restoration, increase, overflow, and abundance. And sometimes God has got to restore not only what the things that were taken from us, but the things that we gave away. We've got to be able to look deeper in what we have. We might have a very small house and a bunch of children, but we might have a great faith and a great job. You might have so you got to be able to show something that God can increase. If you want to increase and improve your life, you've got to have something in your hand to improve. You've got to have something to show that to increase. And then overflow is important because there is no greater satisfaction than being able to help someone else. And I really believe that we are blessed people, but we're blessed to be a blessing, not just so that we can brag about what we have, how blessed we've been, but so that we can be a blessing to someone else who may be less fortunate.
Yeah.
And then abundance is uh amazing, because when I started Woman at the Well Transition Center, and I simply asked for donations for clothes, for medical treatment, for getting jobs, I never thought that the response would be so great that we would be able to help more than 10,000 women over the past 20 years.
Amazing. This has been a joy, having you, and and it does give me hope, and I hope it gives our listeners a little hope. We all have to act, and we all have to respond, and we all have to protect our kids. And it
Yeah,
starts at home, and you're right, it starts at school and in churches. I don't like what's happening in schools where they're
yeah.
teaching about trans, and not that it's not against the people, it's just against, leave the kids alone, let them be kids,
It's not
and
part of education.
not part of education. Even the sex change thing. Just let it be at 18 when they're a little more mature, and things are maybe working better in the head.
Adults need to make adult decisions.
Yeah, you can decide then, and honor and respect our kids and
Absolute.
what they're
And
saying.
that's something we have to teach our children as well,
Yeah.
to honor and respect. But let me I want to interject, and I just want to say what our next plan is for Women at the Well Transition Center. And one of the things that I have realized over the years is that we have millions of people that are entangled in human trafficking, but when it comes to places for these people to go once they're rescued and recovered, we are very limited. We have very limited resources around the world. So, Woman at the Well Transition Center, our next step is to open the Well Woman Ranch. I want to open a Well Woman Ranch, a farm facility that's not a large farm, but it's a place where women from anywhere in the world can come to be restored. There is something very therapeutic about a woman who puts a seed in the dirt, in the ground, and nurtures it and waters it and watches it grow so that it comes back and it's able to nourish someone else and bring health and wellness to someone else. It's very healing for that woman herself. And so our Well Woman Ranch will have a small garden, but it'll be someplace that where we will grow fruits and vegetables to be able to sustain the ranch itself. But we will also have small businesses there. It's a place where they will be able to be restored and recovered and renewed, to be able to have a place to regenerate that one little seed that's in them and become better persons and able to go home to our children and families. So that's our next goal, is the Well Woman Ranch. I'd like to be able to take rescue dogs and horses and everybody else, but we'll see how that goes. But for me, the Well Woman Ranch is important because I know the therapeutic, I know the impact that we have as survivors ourselves on helping other victims become survivors. And
Right.
that's our goal.
And how getting in touch with nature, and walking
Yes.
in the forest among trees, or getting your hands dirty and gardening really does help the healing journey
Yes.
as well.
Absolutely.
Or I have just one other question, and you've already alluded to it, and then we'll find out where we reach you and where we can connect with you. Um, you mentioned God in your life, and I think it's really important. So in terms of giving your life to God, what was that
Yeah.
like for you? And since many may be listening don't have a clue what that means, what does it look like, and what does it mean to, what did it mean to you to give your life to God?
Um, I surrendered my purpose in life to serving God. And by that, I meant to reaching higher and digging deeper for what was more righteous than what I thought was right. Because just what we think is right as normal people, as everyday people, can be very different for different people. What seems right in this, especially in this day and time, what seems right for some is not right for others. So
Hmm.
I'm not looking for right, but I'm looking for righteousness. And I know that there is no greater righteousness than righteousness in God. I gave my life to, and when someone brought Jesus Christ, the gospel of Christ to me in the county jail, I figured, what in the world would he want with a wretch like me? What would God want with somebody who had been through what I've been through and done what I've done and happened to me? And I realized that, I didn't feel that I deserved to be loved. I didn't feel that I deserved to be rescued. And this woman, Pastor Lynette Higgins Orr, talked to me about a man named Jesus who would love me in spite of myself, in spite of everything I did, in spite of everything that had happened to me. And I knew, after reading, I literally began to devour the word of God. And I read about the things that Jesus Christ did. And I realized that if I could give my life to him, he could give me another life. And in spite of everything I've been through, I had been touched, David, by many men, but I was only moved by one, and his name is Jesus. I was touched by so many men, but I was moved by one man, and his name was Jesus. And when I received Jesus into my life, I literally threw up my hands and I said, it's your way. It's not my way. Because I thought that meant I wasn't going to have to go to prison, but I did. And when I went there, he went with me. He didn't leave me at the door. He was there with me every step of the way. to encourage me when my appeals were denied, to comfort me when my children couldn't come and see me, to correct me when I wanted to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing or be in the wrong place with the wrong people. He was there. Always that voice, always the scriptures to help me understand how to do better and how to be better. And that's what it meant for me to give my life to God. It meant for me to live for something greater than myself, for someone greater than myself. And I I will never forget receiving Christ in my life. And I remember when I accepted him as my personal savior, I stood up, and there's a song, an old song that says, I looked at my hands and they looked new. I looked at my feet and they did too. Well, I knew my hands and feet weren't new, David, but when I opened my eyes, it's like I saw the world differently. When I received God in my life, I saw the world differently. And so I began to live differently. Things I used to do, I didn't want to do those things anymore. Things that I used to say, I would catch myself. And it wasn't me, but it was the Spirit of God coming alive in me that said, you can't do that no more. You can't go there no more. You can't wear that anymore. You can't say that anymore. And so, and sometimes it wasn't easy because I'd be like, I want to hear that. Leave me alone. But I was grateful. And I have to say, I'm grateful today for correction. I'm grateful that I was willing to be corrected, because you got to really have a heart that says, I know I did the wrong thing, so show me how to do the right thing.
Yeah, you got to
And
surrender.
yeah, it was total surrender. And I really believe that when suffering and surrender come together, you, you get to that place of salvation. When
Uh,
suffering and surrender come together, you get to salvation. And that's the salvation that comes from that godly sorrow. Because when suffering and surrender comes, you have that sorrow of realizing the impact of our decisions and the things that we did and how it impacted us, how much time it took from us, how it impacted others. And you begin to cry out. And I can remember one time, even in prayer, in my silence, in my prayer, I began to cry out and I heard this sound and I wondered where it was coming from. It was coming from me. It was that sound of godly sorrow. It was that sorrow that was coming from more than here. It was coming from my heart. It was coming from my belly. It was coming from my feet. It was coming from my hands. It was a sorrow that was crying out and saying, help me. I don't want to be like I am anymore. I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to die like this anymore. Save me. I said, God, if you will save me. When I accepted Christ, I said, if you will save me, I'll live my life for you. If you'll take my life in all these little broken pieces and put me back together again, I'll live my life for you. And that's what I've done from that day forward. I haven't always gotten it right, but I'm so grateful that I have a relationship with God. And there's a difference between religion and relationship,
yeah,
because people will get a religion and give it away, change from one religion to another. But when you have a relationship with God, it goes far beyond religion. That's a covenant, and that a covenant goes far beyond contract.
yeah.
So really, to giving my life to God has meant living a new life, one that is accountable and committed and consistent with God and the scriptures of the Bible.
It's a beautiful place to end. Where, where do we reach you, Donna, to connect? And
So
maybe even donate money to your organization too.
yes, please. We always need money, especially for the ranch. Right now, we have two major projects. Getting the ranch is major because that's the next step. I'm going to retire from American Airlines. And when I retire, I want to be able to be there for these women when they come and need help. And so the ranch is really important. The other thing is, every year for the past 24 years, we've given a Christmas party. It's called Christmas Angels Children's Holiday Event. And we give a Christmas party for children whose mothers are incarcerated or have been trafficked. And this is 24 years. I can't believe I've been doing this this long, but we've been doing it this long. And so we have a GoFundMe page under Woman at the Well Transition Center. And it's called Christmas Angels. So you can look at Woman at the Well Transition Center on GoFundMe, or you can look at Christmas Angels, a children's holiday event, which is hosted by Woman at the Well Transition Center. You can also go to my website, which is very simple, www.pastordonnahubbard.com. I didn't change it to Bishop. It's been there for so long, but it's still me. PastorDonnaHubbard.com, www.PastorDonnaHubbard.com, and it will also tell you how you can donate. And you can specify whether it's for the Christmas Angels party every year. This year, our theme is A Night Under the Stars, because we want those children to realize that they are not defined by their circumstances, that we want them to reach beyond the stars for what God has and what life has in store for them.
I think we all
Um,
need to if we're going to transform this planet,
I agree.
We got us,
And so,
the
yeah.
thinking that got us here isn't working.
Yep. So, like I said, you can look on my website. It tells you how to give. Go to GoFundMe, and you'll see our Christmas Angels Children's Holiday Event, or Woman at the Well Transition Center, and you can donate there. You can reach me. Our business line is 470 in the US. It's 470-301-3291. 470-301-3291. If I don't answer or someone doesn't answer, I may be in the air flying, but please leave a message. And we are grateful. There's no donation that's too small, because I truly believe that it was one man and 12 of his friends that changed the world.
Yeah.
So, those small donations make a big difference.
And that's what this show is about. Everybody can make a difference.
Yes.
Everybody can change the world. Let's empower them. Donna, what an absolute honor and joy to have you. And yeah, I'm just so grateful to you. You said yes, and you've been so gracious to email over the past month or so.
Yes. Thank you.
My pleasure. I want to thank everybody for listening to 26 Minutes with. We went way over, but we needed to today. Next week, Kathy Nesbitt is going to fill in as host as she's talks to food and farming activist Rachel Parent. If you like what we do, comment on our YouTube page, share, let us know what guests you'd like to have us to have on. Until then, just make it a good week, everybody. Stay well.